I've played a lot of Fire Emblem. Not only have I completed every main series game, most of them multiple times, but I've also dived deep into the world of ROM hacks and fan games, and I've even modified these hacks and vanilla games to allow for absurd challenge runs. And on the whole, Fire Emblem is a very experimental series. Many entries take rapid departures from each other and don't resemble the vanilla formula in the slightest. I want you to bear all of that in mind when I tell you that Cerulean Crescent by Rivain is the most absurd Fire Emblem game I have ever played. And I mean that as a compliment. This style of gameplay isn't going to be for everyone, but for me, this is the perfect Fire Emblem that I didn't even know I needed. So please let me take the next 20 or so minutes to gush about Cerulean Crescent and hopefully convince you to try it out too. There's a lot going on, so I'll start with some of the global changes. In order to lean into Cerulean Crescent's emphasis on fast-paced gameplay and movement skills, all of the units in Cerulean Crescent, including the infantry, have been given Canto, meaning that they can use the remainder of their move after taking certain actions such as trading or visiting villages. But don't worry, LTCers, cavalry still get bias over infantry, as they not only have more movement, but also get Canto Plus, meaning they can attack and move or heal and move as necessary. Infantry do, however, gain global access to Shove in order to make up for the lack of Canto Plus, and in general, the infantry tend to have better stats than cavalry, although stats aren't everything when it comes to combat in CC. You see, the weapon triangle has been cranked up to 11, as now being at triangle advantage represents 3 damage and 30 hit. Meanwhile, being at triangle disadvantage is -3 damage and -30 hit. And that's before factoring in the families of weapons that multiply triangle effectiveness. Reavers double these bonuses, and the curved weapons quadruple them, meaning that with a curved weapon at advantage, you get 12 extra damage and 120 extra hit, plus 120 extra avoid, and 12 extra defense. Because of this, the weapon triangle feels far more impactful than it has been in any Fire Emblem game I've played. And throughout my journeys, I tried to make sure that I had a fairly even balance of sword, axe, and lance users so I could leverage the triangle to my advantage. With that in mind, it's worth pointing out to any GBA heads that there is no magic triangle. Light, dark, and anima magic all exist, but none of them are considered to be triangle advantage over each other, and the same applies to bows. Although despite existing outside the triangle, these 4 weapon families can still be quite effective, as they have a number of tools that do extra damage or have special effects. Bow users in particular are valuable because any human infantry with a bow rank is capable of mounting a ballista. As such, it's not just archers and snipers, but warriors and bow armors are also capable of getting on a ballista and firing away. Although you'll notice I said any human with bow access, and that's because Cerulean Crescent's cast is a little eccentric. I won't spoil any of the late joiners, but within the first 5 maps, you get access to both a playable Cyclops and a playable Chicken. And things only get more wacky from there, with eventually you getting the option to build your own custom monster unit, which you can give various skills and stat modifiers in order to have it best suit the army you want it to slot into. And there are some pretty wacky options for your custom unit, such as a mogul who can one-shot anything on the first turn, a skeleton that self-revives every map, or a gargoyle with the buffed version of Inspiration. And those are just a few options that I've used. You can mix and match different traits in order to make the monster of your dreams. It's like if Robin and Corrin's avatar creation fundamentally changed them as a unit. But the craziest thing about this custom monster is they're probably not even in the top 10 wildest units in Cerulean Crescent. because CC's characters have a lot of stuff going on. Most units in this hack have between 1 to 3 gimmicks associated with them. These gimmicks can be something as simple as mounted staffer, or more complex stuff like skills or personal weapons. I'll talk about the skills first, because that's definitely going to be the most contentious aspect for some people. If you're the sort of fan that can't stand skills in modern Fire Emblem, you're absolutely not going to have the patience for CC. Because, much like with the weapon triangle, skills are dialed up to 11 in this game. While most of the skills in Fates and Awakening aren't super impactful and instead do stuff like boost damage or hit under conditions, in Cerulean Crescent, the skills a character starts out with can basically define their niche and determine whether or not you want to include them on your team. As an example, I'll point to the game's Jagan, Tower. He is a war monk with access to both high-rank axes and staves, and arguably his position as the Jagan is one of his gimmicks, since he has better starting stats than the rest of your squad and higher weapon ranks to use high-rank axes. But he also has 2 personal skills which help to define his niche should you choose to use him long-term. The first of them is Decay, which means any adjacent foes are considered to be at triangle disadvantage regardless of what weapon they have equipped. Since the weapon triangle is so powerful in Cerulean Crescent, Decay is really nice, as it ensures that Tower is almost always at triangle advantage. And this applies not only to sword, lance, and axe units, but also to anyone outside of the weapon triangle. So this is how you can get triangle advantage over archers and mages, finally. But this skill also helps Tower as a Jagan, since it applies triangle disadvantage to the foe, rather than giving him triangle advantage. So if you're trying to set up a kill for one of your training projects, giving them that little extra damage nudge and better accuracy by giving Tower adjacency to their foe is going to be super helpful. And his other skill also helps with training up units, as Stun is an action that he can choose when initiating combat. If he chooses to stun an enemy, then they will not die. At most, they can be left at 1 HP, like False Swipe. And they will get the freeze status applied to them, meaning they can no longer move, at least for 1 turn, as all statuses in Cerulean Crescent only last 1 turn. Because he is guaranteed to leave his foe alive, Stun is a good way of once again setting up kills. However, it also carries double duty, as long term, Tower can still use Stun against enemies he's incapable of one-rounding, and by applying the freeze status, he prevents them from being a threat to the rest of your army. If this sounds like a lot of stuff for one unit to do, it is. But Tower isn't alone in being a complicated character. Like I said, there's 1 to 3 gimmicks on every member of the cast. And since no one has any overlapping skills, it means depending on your army composition, you're going to have a very different experience. Which, of course, makes replays of Cerulean Crescent shine even more, as you can have a wildly different army and basically feel like you're playing a whole new game. But I haven't even talked about how personal weapons work in this game, because as you can expect, they are also wacky, but they have a self-repair durability system that allows them to be used on every single map. If you've played 3 Houses, it's sort of similar to spell charges in that. If a weapon has 5 durability, such as Gecko's Frying Pan, she can use it 5 times and it will break because it's at 0 durability, but it is not removed from her inventory. Instead, at the end of the map, it gets restored up to 5 uses. So you can use all of these personal weapons up to 5 times. And as you probably expect, the personal weapons are just as crazy as the skills. For example, the early archer Yvette has a brave crossbow that allows her to take an extra action anytime she gets a kill. And extra actions are a bit of a running theme in Cerulean Crescent, as many characters have gimmicks that grant them an extra turn under specific conditions. Your first trainee, Gecko has Gale Force. Your Armor Knight Mince has a pot that allows him to take an extra turn when he uses his Swarp skill. Your Early Mage has a 10 range tome that gives him an extra action, perfect for using his Lunge skill. And your Dancer, Oriana, gets an extra action anytime she dances, although she can only dance once per turn because otherwise it would be infinite actions. But you kind of feel like you have infinite actions anyway, especially with Ellery, the main lord, whose personal skill, the Power of Leadership, applies a 4-way dance anytime she gets a kill. Granted, since most of your kills are at 1 range, you're usually only dancing 3 people, but this is still an incredible force multiplier and allows you to get so many extra actions. CC really is just the game of extra actions, isn't it? With all of these extra turns and powerful skills, you might expect that CC is a bit of a pub stomp. But the enemies actually put up a very strong fight. Not with skills of their own, but instead just with raw stats that tend to outmatch the majority of your army. And so, if you want to keep up, you need to leverage the tools you have available to the best of your ability, which can, at times, be somewhat overwhelming, especially if you're using some of the more complicated units. As such, it's fairly easy to make a mistake with serious consequences. But thankfully, Cerulean Crescent has a solution for this as well, in the form of the turn save system. If you ever make a mistake that you want to undo, you can reset your totally legitimate copy of Game Boy Advance, and then hit Resume Chapter, and this will not start you exactly where you left off, but instead at the beginning of the most recent turn. So if you reset halfway through turn 3, you'll start at the start of turn 3. Functionally, this acts kind of like an infinite use turn wheel that can only rewind by 1 turn. And I've spoken before about how I'm not a huge fan of this system, as I feel it removes the stakes from Fire Emblem, but in the case of Cerulean Crescent, I think this was absolutely the correct call, as turns themselves tend to be pretty long with the number of extra actions you can take, and things are complicated enough that, especially when starting out, you are going to be using the rewind function more than you think. And rewind isn't the only bit of quality of life Cerulean Crescent has. You can check enemy inventory and stats at a glance without opening up their screen, and you can press select to view a global enemy range. That way you can keep squishy characters like healers and mages out of danger. Cerulean Crescent also has a bunch of alternate game modes to choose from. Mellow mode serves as this game's version of easy mode, wherein all player characters are buffed with a hidden +4 to their damage, defense, and resistance, and +20 to their hit and avoid. You can also use casual mode to turn off permadeath if you so desire. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're a masochist, the untested and deliberately unbalanced misery mode makes things, well, miserable by pumping up enemy stats to an absurd degree, much more than the intended normal mode. And Manster mode removes much of your economy, but adds the capture command from Thracia to allow you to steal enemy weapons and make up for the lack of money. Although this is kind of hilarious when combined with Midas mode, which gives you functionally infinite gold, as it stocks your armory up to the maximum amount of gold at the start of every chapter. Obviously an unbalanced experience, but it's nice if you don't really like dealing with economy stuff. You can also alternate between different growth modes. There's fixed growths, which make characters always get their average stats, 0% growths, which prevents characters from gaining stats on level up, 100% growths, which guarantees characters will get every stat on level up, and plus 15% growths, which just boosts player growths by 15%, as you might expect. The last two options available are 1RN mode, which removes the 2RN system in order to make hit rates be literally what is displayed, and the EXP fatigue mode. You see, normally your experience gain stops at turn 18 in order to prevent excessive grinding. However, if you don't like this setting, you can turn it off and gain experience for as many turns as you desire. And the fact that this is allowed to be turned off despite it being against the developer's vision for the game shows that these options are meant to help more people get into Cerulean Crescent. If there's an aspect of the game that you don't like, such as the economy or the experience fatigue, you can just turn it off and ignore it. It's all about creating the experience that is the most fun for you. And I honestly find that design approach to be super admirable. Cerulean Crescent also has a really interesting quest system, wherein there are certain chapters that function as interludes, without any combat, and just have Ellery exploring around and talking to civilians. Some of these civilians will offer you rewards, and other ones sell you stuff for gold. But the most interesting element of these interludes is that there are NPCs who will give Ellery quests. And these quests, should you choose to accept them, carry over across multiple chapters. For example, very early on, you get a quest that has you rescuing some spice runners. In the next chapter, if you go to the designated tiles, you will get a reward and they'll show up to assist you in a later chapter as a recruitable wyvern. Other quests end up more complicated, such as chasing a book across multiple chapters or getting haunted by a specter who will not leave Ellery alone. This side quest element adds to the world in a way that is cool from both a gameplay and story perspective, as it makes everything feel much more lived in than it would if it was just a random side objective. But of course, that kind of dovetails into the main reason this review has taken so long to get out. I really didn't care for the story of Cerulean Crescent. In fact, for me personally, this is one of the few times that a game's story has actively detracted from my enjoyment of its gameplay. And I feel that's a relevant element to bring up when reviewing the game, because the story is a big part of it. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that this was a project largely made by one person, Radiance, out of a large amount of creative passion. And considering that it was provided for free for so many people to enjoy, I think it would be inappropriate for me to have a mean-spirited takedown of the story and why it personally didn't work for me. Especially when, if my chat is any indication, it did work for so many others. So, in an effort to make my criticisms constructive instead of mean-spirited, I want to start by highlighting the elements of the world building and story that I did enjoy before moving into what ultimately turned me off from the narrative in general. And by far, the biggest positive is the commitment to flavor. I already mentioned that the side quests help to add to the world feeling lived in, but Cerulean Crescent has so many other small touches, things that are normally overlooked, that really help make the world feel real. Stat boosters have been replaced by food items that correspond with the appropriate stat. So coffee boosts your speed, fortune cookies boost your luck, etc. There's also some food that has trade-offs, like monster chops, which will boost some stats but lower your luck. The magic spells also have a trend of being named after the first person who they killed, rather than their inventor, and this helps to highlight the region's emphasis on cruelty and death. It's not just item names that get attention, but their descriptions too, as almost everything is described from the point of view of Ellery, which means character bios, rather than being an unbiased report, reflect her attitude towards specific allies or, in her view, underlings. And on that topic, Ellery is probably the evilest protagonist that we've had in a Fire Emblem game, mainline or Romhack, and it's a delightful change of pace from the goody two-shoes that we normally get stuck with. Making things more interesting, Ellery's descent into villainy doesn't come from a fundamental change in her morals, but rather the fact that she stops deluding herself into thinking she's good. And Ellery isn't the only character to get attention in the main plot. Instead of hiding character interactions behind support convos, they are incorporated into the main story. Similar to the Tellius games, Cerulean Crescent features a ton of boss conversations between your minor characters and minor antagonists, helping to flesh out the relationships between all of the people in this complicated political drama. Even during story cutscenes, oftentimes minor characters will have some interactions with each other, with Ellery and other main cast members completely absent, helping to flesh out their exact motivations and why they're here on the Crescent or in Ellery's crew. This ensures that, at least on a surface level, you get to know basically everyone in the cast, even if you're not using them on your core team. That being said, because of how large the cast is, this can contribute to some amount of story bloat. And so, while the highlighting of minor cast members is in a vacuum a good thing, it does unfortunately come alongside one of my major criticisms of Cerulean Crescent. The story seems to waste your time a lot. The further we get into the campaign, the more frequently subplots are brought up that don't ultimately go anywhere. By far the most egregious instance of this happens in Act 3, with the conflict between Rosetta and Sequin, both of whom are set up as potential antagonists for Ellery. Multiple long cutscenes are devoted entirely to setting up this potential conflict. We know there's going to be some big issue when their father ultimately dies and one of them has to become the ruler. Except there isn't any huge conflict. As soon as Sequin declares that he is not accepting Rosetta's rule, he is unceremoniously killed by his second-in-command. Thusly, all of the time building up their politics feels entirely wasted. And those were pretty verbose scenes. I don't mind if a story is long and has good reason for it, but if you're just gonna waste my time on something that goes nowhere, it feels a little bit frustrating. And Sequin is far from the only character to get built up for a while, only to unceremoniously die as soon as they would become relevant. If you were interested in how Ellery might handle her former mentor, the Spy Master, being an antagonist, well, too bad for you. He just immediately gets killed by ballistas. Plenty of other villains die at the altar of making a generic guard seem like a badass. And Lindros' mentor, who betrays him and tries to kill him, is unceremoniously killed by a skeleton riding an eyeball. From my understanding, the main purpose of these arbitrary and random deaths are to show that the Crescent is a place where even the strongest can die to a simple mistake. And while I appreciate that the first time when the Cold Caller, a would-be badass wizard, is cut down by a generic guard, repeating the message over and over has diminishing returns. And instead, it feels like any setup for these characters was just a waste of time. While it's true that in real life, death is random and isn't always narratively fulfilling, this is a story, not real life. And I think it's fair to be unsatisfied at narratively unsatisfying deaths, especially considering the amount of time spent on these characters beforehand. It feels as though the game doesn't respect my time and is kind of rubbing my face in it. This is highlighted in the death of Lindros' mentor, where the funny skeleton man laughs and says, "Damn, he sure talks a lot. I wish he would shut up because he talks so much," after killing him. And this is a joke frequently employed by Cerulean Crescent. It will spend a long time on a monologue or a lore dump, and then some character will say, "You sure talk a lot, that was a waste of time." And like, yeah, these scenes are very verbose. And it's hard to get invested in the lore when people are constantly yelling in your ear, "That's boring, that's a waste of time." It feels like it's not confident enough to just give these verbose lore dumps and expect people to care about them. And ironically, it kind of is a self-fulfilling message, as, at least for me, it undercut my investment in the story to constantly have Ellery and others tell me that the story didn't matter. It feels analogous to the MCU following up its serious moments with self-deprecating jokes, taking you out of the mood. Although, on that topic, Cerulean Crescent does struggle to keep a consistent mood. as it seems to simultaneously want to be a serious story about a dark protagonist like Ellery, while also keeping a lighthearted, jokey tone. And while this can work with an extremely talented team, as is demonstrated in one of my favorite pieces of media, BoJack Horseman, here, I don't think it does. The scene where this stands out to me the most is when Ellery first confronts her father. Under the pretense of a false parlay, she plans to kill her father, who she blames for much of her trauma. And this should be a very serious moment. The false parlay is one of the more evil things Ellery has done at this point in the narrative, and killing her father is a big emotional moment for her, tied into parts of her backstory. However, this parlay scene is intercut with a series of jokes between Oriana, Tower, Lindros, and Mintz, where they fail to understand some sign commands and can't decide whether Ellery is giving the signal or not, and it just ruins the mood, in my opinion. Without the jokes, this scene could have been a highlight of the story, but with them, it has me actively rolling my eyes from the tonal whiplash. Although the whiplash isn't limited to just emotions. The story itself can feel pretty disjointed at times. I think in large part because initially it was meant to be a series of episodic adventures before being adapted into a single continuous narrative. Because of this, there are certain chapters that are incredibly jarring pace breakers. Chapters 13 and 20 particularly stand out as feeling very out of place, as 13 has you exploring some mines for basically no reason right after you decided to start a civil war, and Chapter 20, while resolving the Civil War arc, feels out of place as it comes directly after the crew breaks up. Yet, the consequences of this breakup don't happen until Chapter 21. There's plenty of other smaller moments of friction, but I don't think they're worth emphasizing, especially since I've gone on about this story for quite a while. So instead, I want to end by saying I know that there is a Cerulean Crescent sequel in the works, and I genuinely hope that I'll enjoy that story more, because I think there's some real potential here in CC. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of positives. The world has had a lot of attention put into it, and Ellery is an incredibly interesting protagonist for the world that's been set up. And as such, I am genuinely eager to see the next project that takes place here, despite the frustration I've felt at the story of this one. With all that being said, I would still absolutely recommend Cerulean Crescent. It adds a whole new depth to Fire Emblem that is so satisfying. Almost as satisfying as being one of my patrons! Sorry, I couldn't think of a good transition, but thank you to the patrons, including Logs, Glup Shido, Erica Ford, Perg Knight, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Arvis, Floahay, Amy Hazel, Hungry Heart, Hound Dogs, Burnt to Cinder, Ziggy WSB, Lovis Roman, Shinthia, Faulty Videos, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Anna Cabana, The Daily Fugle, Faye, Magic Bite, Thoughtful Insanity, Robin Goodfeller, JT Spritter, Laura Hunter, Die Psych, Chris, Root Beer Pants, Queen Elizam, Control Aegis, Roman Kormancic, Nick Knack Hammersmack, Carrier Has Left, Angel Nap Caceres, Zanwiff, Not Gino, Name Number 5, Squid Stats, Flynn Gone, Edward C., Cabbage, Caius Cole, Bree, Punch Fighter Champion, Eggman, Maxine the Vampire Queen, Sardonic Muse, Wesley Toma, Sensitive Luigi, Rage, Dr. Frying Pan, Toon, Femtal Illness, Wannabe Cinnabon, Punk Tattoo Guy, Key the Iron Idol, Jax McMahon, Sir Girlixie, Rezi, Dino Anna, Andu, Rhea, Gameboo, Carosa, Fyrant, Your Doctor, Frozen Helm, KH, Girl Boss, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Jaden, Dylan Solis, Some Trades, Alice, Smaz Ruby, Robin D, Alenby, Thaythom, Klon, Pillow Willow, Gabe the Green, and especially my Jagans, Hime Rowan, Siggy, Dragon Mac Lancer, and Autumn. Your support makes these videos possible. If you would like early access to videos and a bunch of other cool benefits, check out the link below, where for as little as $3 a month, you can support the channel and get your name on the list with these cool cats. But please only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem. Regardless of what you do, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.